So let's see if this student's planning has fulfilled all the requirements. So if you read this, the students gave an introduction which includes the independent variable, and the student mentioned that the area of the solution is a dependent variable. But is this really necessary? It's actually not needed, because in the previous question, they have already asked the student to identify the independent and dependent variable. So there's no need to repeat this part again. So this no marks will be awarded. And then let's see if the students have gained any mark for the next criteria, which is standard variable. So the student mentioned that the total volume of solution must be the same. So remember I said it's good to remember that all the solutions of the volume that you are using need to be standardized. But in this case, do you really know what is the volume of what solution that needs to be standardized? So that's the question mark. What solution? So if possible, must mention like starch, enzyme, or any solution that you are using or reagent during the experiment. Then the next point, we know that this is actually an enzyme catalyzed reaction. So the temperature needs to be standardized by keeping the solution in a thermostatically controlled water bath. In this case, instead of solution, it's actually the Petri dish. It's also fine. So this, the student will be awarded 1 mark for standard. And the next thing is, pH needs to be maintained by using pH buffer. Actually, it's not wrong, but in this question, since it's carried out in the agar plate, so the mark scheme actually requires student to mention where do you place this pH buffer. It should be in the agar. As the enzyme will be diffusing across the agar, so it's important to make sure that the buffer is included into the agar with the starch solution. Then the next point, the depth of the well needs to be standardized. So now the question is, does the depth actually affect the rate of reaction? So the more important thing to standardize here is the depth of the agar or the volume of the agar, which represents the volume of the starch. So another thing that you can standardize about the substrate will be the concentration of starch. So this student did not manage to score more than 1 mark for standard variable. Usually standard variable you can aim for 3 points and above, because as you manipulate one variable, the other variables need to be standardized, and you can score 3 marks in maximum, but you try to write as many as possible. Then the next point, the student actually mentioned that the stock solution is placed in a well using a graduated pipette and left it for 20 minutes. This one looks like the student is trying to standardize the time, which is good attempt, but the idea here is, if you would want to see the process of diffusion across the agar plate, at least 30 minutes is required. So this is too short. At least 30 minutes, and if we would want to see a more obvious result, you can leave it for up to 24 hours. So this one, the student failed to get 1 mark. And after the given time, plates are incubated using incubator. So you can see that the student is actually a bit confused, as you have already mentioned maintaining the temperature using thermostatically controlled water bath, and here you are mentioning about the incubator again. So this one is misleading. An iodine solution is added to the agar. The volume of the iodine added must be the same. So this one also looks like it's one of the standardized variable, but remember I said earlier on that this experiment, the color intensity doesn't matter. So the volume of iodine and the concentration doesn't really matter, as I'm going to measure the area or the distance that is stained yellow. So here, the solutions are left for another 10 minutes. This timing is not really relevant. Okay, then the student is trying to talk about dependent variable. The area stained brown is calculated by measuring the diameter of the area. Okay, so let's look at the method. The diameter is divided by 2 to obtain the radius. And using the formula pi r squared, we can determine the area stained brown. It looks like the student is actually quite detailed, but be more observant or be aware when you are using the apparatus. The student is actually using a meter rule. To measure the distance on the agar plate, do you really need to use a meter rule? So this is actually a mistake. You should be using an ruler instead. So the student actually missed out another point. Then the next point, the student mentioned again that colorimeter can also be used. How can you place an agar plate into a colorimeter to observe the color change? Take note, colorimeter is only meant for determining color change in a solution. And the last few points that you can always aim to score will be reliability. So the student mentioned that the experiment is repeated several times and take the mean. This one looks like it's a bit risky because the student mentioned several times, but it's accepted in a mark scheme. But advisable to mention how many times. So another 2 times. For each concentration. And next one, the student did mention about control experiment. That is relevant for this experiment as I can use it as a comparison. And about safety and hazard, this student did elaborate about the low risk experiment and the precautions to be taken, because the fungi could cause allergic reaction and irritation actually can come from the enzyme. So this student managed to score 4 out of 8 marks. This student actually shows some understanding about paper 5 planning, but due to lack of precision, therefore couldn't score the full mark. So now I'm going to show you another sample script, which is an improved version. For this part, I'm going to show a sample of another student's write-up, and you will see how it's different from the earlier one, and we can see how the marks will be awarded. Number 1, we can see that this student is actually able to identify the independent variable. The student did mention about 5 concentration. So including 0.5, you have 1, 2, 3, 4 and 0.5. So total of 5 concentration. So this will be 1 mark. And the student did mention about how to prepare the independent variable by using proportional dilution and applying the formula C1D1 equals to C2V2. It's just that the student actually go through a long elaboration about how to prepare it, which is not wrong, but later I can show you another method whereby you can just present your answer in a table form, or you just mention in general. Next point, the student started to talk about the standard variable where volume is standardized, but remember I said same volume of what solution need to be mentioned. And next point, the student did mention about incubator, which is meant to standardize the temperature. The temperature, you can propose a reasonable temperature, but if you can't, you can just leave it and just state that maintain the same temperature using an incubator. Then another point about the timing, the student is awarded another mark. And you realize that putting under the same condition is a very vague statement, so no marks will be awarded. Then the same thing here, the student attempt to talk about standardizing the pH, but remember earlier on I mentioned that pH must be in the agar. So this one, no marks is awarded. And then the iodine solution. Is it necessary to mention the same volume of iodine solution? Not really, so no mark will be awarded. The next point will be dependent variable. So the student actually calculated the area stained brown by using a grid and counting the area stained brown, or by counting the squares. So therefore, this is qualified as 1 mark. For the next marking point, you will see that the student actually knew what is the expectation of the question, and the student actually remembered that the ultimate purpose of the experiment is to find out the concentration of amylase inside the fungal extract. So the student mentioned that the area that is closest for the fungal extract compared to the standard solution will represent the concentration of the extract. So this is awarded another mark. And the next point will be related to reliability. This is supposedly the must-score point, but as the student mentioned that repeat the investigation and calculate the average, that's one problem here. The student did not mention about how many times to repeat. So we must always mention at least another 2 times or 3 times and calculate the mean. And the next marking point will be safety and hazard. This student did not mention about control experiment, but at least there's still safety and hazard. So the student proposed to use glove when staining. It should be correct, but the student mistakenly mentioned that iodine is toxic, which is not appropriate. We should just mention that iodine is an irritant. So the student failed to score the last 2 points. So in total, this student managed to get 6 marks out of 8. To master Paper 5 planning skills with more examples of Paper 5 experiments and the statistics part, do join my group or private tuition. Thank you.
That's all for today's video. If you're interested in more genuine sharing by other geniuses, please subscribe to our channel and don't forget to turn on the notification bell, ding dong. Also, if you're struggling with 1 or 2 past year questions and the mark scheme just doesn't seem to help, Genie has got you covered. Feel free to let us know what question it is by filling in the Google form linked in the description below. GenieUs Hub will get genius teachers to fulfill your request for the solution. Genie will see you next time. Bye-bye.